lekulam, and welcome to our first lesson on the book of Zohar. What we're gonna do in this lesson, we're gonna be studying a portion of the introduction to the book of Zohar that is called Zohar Chadash, and the section that we're gonna be studying is called the lily. And in this section, we're gonna go deeper into what this small section, the lily, is trying to tell us, because it is telling us a lot. But before we do that, in this first lesson, I want to make sure that you also get introduced into a way to approach the book of Zohar before we read it or study it, or the proper way, which is a proper way to connect to the light that the book of splendor, the book of Zohar, is trying to help us connect to. A lot of people study the book of Zohar, and the sole intention is basically to understand it, to decipher all the cryptic sentences that are there. And they think that by basically knowing what each of those hidden meaning actually are, they're already connecting. And the truth is that according to Kabbalists, is called knowledge, and knowledge is not spiritual advancement. In fact, there might be a person studying the Zohar, reading the Zohar, that might not understand anything in the Zohar. However, because this person has the proper intention of why he or she is reading or studying the Zohar, is connecting more or has advanced more by the reading of the Zohar than the person that knows the Zohar from beginning to end. And that is because this person, even though he or she doesn't know any meaning of, doesn't understand what is really being explained in the Zohar, this person is having the right intention, is still connected, is still working the proper way with what the book of Zohar is trying to get us to, which is connect with the light of the Torah, the light of that reform us. And this light will help us connect to other souls as well. And that's why before we study the book of Zohar, and today we're going to have this introduction of how to actually start our study properly. That's why we're going to learn this, and then after that, in the next shurims and everything, we're going to see that this will help us. This will keep us focused and connected to what really the Zohar is trying to basically give us, which is an understanding that everything here, even though it is full of mystery and a lot of things that are deep, the real thing is that you need to connect to it, even if your human mind doesn't understand it. Your soul does, okay? And you'll find a lot of people that will read the lily and they will explain to you what everything in there means. You'll find them in academic circles, and you're going to find them as well in other traditions, like Hermetic tradition, which they study Kabbalah in their own way, and they try to bend it in a way that is like has to do with their Hermetic tradition. But all that is an improper way to connect to it, because in this way what they're doing is that they're mixing, they're not connecting things, they're mixing things, and mixing is actually breaking something in spirituality. Okay, so we need to connect to this book properly, so we don't break anything in spirituality, so we don't damage anything, so we don't open any gates of Tuma as we study this. And look at this book and read it and understand it in a way that it will help us to connect, like I said before, to the light. That it will not help us connect to the intellect, the human intellect, but to the higher intellect, to our soul. And in this way connect us also to the soul of other human beings, which is basically the same soul of Adam, right? To the source of our souls, which is Adam, Harishon, the first Adam. So the first thing that we're going to do before we start studying the Zohar is to concentrate, and we're going to scan, let me put it in the screen, we're going to scan this sequence of letters. And you're going to scan it from, if you're looking at your screen, from right to left, okay? And I'm going to give you a few seconds to scan this. And like I said before, you don't have to understand this. All you have to do is concentrate, scan the letters, and don't worry about understanding what it says in there or anything like that. You will not anyway. Just concentrate on these letters and scan them. Now that we have scanned these letters, we're going to do a prayer. This prayer is from the Ari. And this prayer is actually said before we start studying the Zohar. Ruler of the universe and master of all masters, the Father of Chesed, mercy, and forgiveness. We thank you, our God, and God of our forefathers, by bowing down and kneeling, that you brought us closer to your Torah and your holy works, and you enable us to take part in the secrets of your holy Torah. How worthy are we that you grant us with such big favor, which is the reason we plead before you, that you will forgive and acquit all our sins, and that they should not bring separation between you and us. And may be your will before you, our God and God of our forefathers, that you will awaken and prepare our hearts to love and revere you. And may you listen to our utterances and open our closed hearts to the hidden studies of your Torah. And may our study be pleasant before you, before your place of honor, as the aroma of sweet incense. And may you emanate to us light from the source of our souls, to all our being. And may the sparks of your holy servants, through which you reveal your wisdom to the world, shine. May their merit and the merit of their forefathers and the merit of their Torah and holiness support us, so we shall not stumble through our study. And by their merit enlighten our eyes in our learning, as it is stated by King David, the sweet singer of Israel. Open your eyes so that I will see wonders from your Torah. For the Lord give wisdom, from his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. May the utterances of my mouth and the strength of my heart find favor before you, God, my strength and my Redeemer. So in this prayer that was basically written by the Ari, or prescribed by the Ari before we study the Zohar, there's something very important to remember. And he says that may the merit and the merit of the forefathers and the merit of their Torah and holiness support us, so we shall not stumble through our study. And also mentions, that in the top, before that, he said that may you listen to our utterances and open our closed hearts to the hidden studies of your Torah, and may our study be pleasant before you, before your place of honor, as the aroma of sweet incense. And those of you who have studied the Parsha and that have, the studies of the Parsha that I have done, insights of Kabbalistic insights in the Parsha, you're going to find there in some of these studies that I did in which is mentioned the ingredients of the incense when the tabernacle was being built, that these 11 ingredients have to do with basically fixing or mending the breaking, or these 11 parts that were basically under Tumah, and these were corrections. These 11 things were corrections of these 11 klipot. And in here, this is what we're doing. When we're studying the Zohar, we're not studying something out of because we want knowledge. We want knowledge of what each of these cryptic passages mean or anything like that. It's because when we're studying this, we are basically revealing light. We are basically liberating sparks from the klipot. And that's why it's important, that we call on the merits of our forefathers and those who actually were teachers before us, that their merit and the merit of their fathers, support us so that we shall not stumble through our study. Because a lot of people study the Zohar, and when they study the Zohar, what they do is actually sometimes, study the Zohar and use the Zohar for their own, I would say, agenda and things like that. And the Zohar, the real agenda of the Zohar is to connect the people of Israel, which is the head, right? And then after that, after the people of Israel is united, the redemption is going to come. So the nations are going to receive this light as well. Meaning, those altruistic desires, they need to be connected and corrected. And then all these other desires, which are desires of egoism, will also be corrected through the connection of the head, which is called Israel. So, who is this Israel, right? Why Israel is important? First of all, Israel, we have a physical nation called Israel. But for Kabbalists, there's something called roots and branches. So there's a physical Israel, but there's also spiritual Israel. And this spiritual Israel is those people who actually are people that are looking or yearning for direct connection with the Creator. So Israel basically means Yashar El. Yashar means direct, and El is a name of God. So those who want to go directly, straight to El, to God. And that's Israel. So that may include even people or souls that are born as part of the nations, and not necessarily, like all the Jews or anything like that, but mostly, the spiritual Israel will be people that are yearning for that spiritual connection and that direct connection with the Creator, okay? So we're going to talk about that spiritual Israel in this part of the Zohar Chadash, which is called the lily. And we're going to read it first, and then we're going to explain a little bit about it, all right? So it says, Rabbi Chizkiah opened his discourse and said, "It is written, as a rose among the thorns, so is my beloved amongst the daughters." Who is the rose, right? Even though it says the rose, in some Zohar translations, it's gonna say the lily, okay? And you're just in the translation given by the Sulam commentary. But the rose is actually Shoshanah. Shoshanah, that's the rose or lily, okay? Who is the rose? Who's the lily? This refers to Knesset Israel. Knesset Israel is the Congregation of Israel, the collective soul roots of Israel, Malchut. For there is one level of rose, and there is another level of a rose. Just as a rose, which is found amidst the thorns, has within it the colors red and white, also Knesset Israel has within her both judgment and loving kindness. Just as the rose has in it 13 petals, so too Knesset Israel has within her 13 petals of mercy, which surround her from all her sides. Okay? So this is the first part, right? In which we just read, about an introduction basically of who is the lily. And who's the lily? The lily is actually Knesset Israel. Knesset Israel is a congregation of Israel. And what does... So I'm going to be using the Sulam commentary. in order to explain this. And also later we're going to continue with the other paragraph, and then we're going to go to explaining more in depth, what is this all about, okay? So, explanation that the Baal HaSulam, those of you who don't know who's the Baal HaSulam is Yehuda HaAshlag. Yehuda Ashlag, it's one of the latest, most important Kabbalists. If it wasn't for him, there wouldn't have been any of us at this moment studying or teaching about Kabbalah. He opened the gates and broke what is being called an iron curtain, so everyone will be able to study Kabbalah. And it's because of him that we have today groups like the Kabbalah Center, Bnei Baruch, groups like Kabbalah Mashiach in Spain, groups like Kabbalah Shomrin Laboker in Mexico, and a lot of different groups, and even this channel here in YouTube, or group in Facebook. And it's because of him, what he did, the job that he did, all the sacrifice that he did, that today we are able to tap into that light and this better understanding of the hidden meanings of Torah, called Kabbalah, in a more modern language, okay? And those of you who are, let me see if I can get it, just in case you got no idea who's Baal HaSulam. This is a picture of the Baal HaSulam. That's him, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi Ashlag. And if you have, let's say, like the Zohar from the Kabbalah Center, the Zohar from the Kabbalah Center is basically an unabridged version of the Sulam commentary. And so probably the best version when it comes to the English translation of the Sulam, at least in English right now. Okay, so the explanation of this. The first thing that we need to understand is names in the Zohar have certain meanings. So if you want to study deep the Zohar, you have to understand a little bit of gematria, meaning what each letter of the Hebrew alphabet means, and also what is the numerical value. So in this case we have Rabbi Chizkiah. Rabbi Chizkiah, the numerical value of Rabbi Chizkiah is 130. 130 is the numerical value of Ain, and also the numerical value of Arik Anpin. And Arik Anpin, it's, as we're gonna see later, is probably something that some of you haven't heard. It's something called Atik. There's Arik Anpin and there's Abi. But what I want you to think is this: forget about Atik. Just think that Arik Anpin is what is called Keter, okay? And then Ava Ve'ima is Chokma and Bina. Serampin is Tifaret and Malchut. So we're talking about the word of Asilu in the whole Zohar. But when you really look at it, the book of Zohar, even though it talks about the word of Asilu, it refers more about what's going on below in the work of Bria, okay? So as we study, we're going to see this more clear. But for now, just think that Arik Anpin is Keter. So when you read Rabbi Chizkiah, right, just think that this is the light of Arik Anpin, meaning Keter. And then when it says, Patach means, open, that means that there was a gate of light that was open, and there was a discourse. Discourse means, it was a verb, there was an action made, and then something written. That means that something was in an action, right? There was an action there. As a rose among the thorns, so is my beloved among the daughters. Now, the Baal HaSulam tells that we need to understand that these are basically 10 sephirot, all the way from Keter, Chokma, Bina, Chesed, Geburat, Tiferet, Esar, Talon, and Yesod, Malchut, right? Which they are known all together by the first letter, Kachabtum, okay? And essentially, when you really look at it, like we mentioned here, in reality there's only 5. It's only 5 because you have Camping is Keter, Ava Ve'ima is Chokmah Bina, Serampim is 6 sephirot, Chesed Geburah Tifaret, Hod Netzach and Yesod, and Malchut is Malchut, right? Which also is also known as Nukva. Now, Serampim, you go over here, Serampim and Nukva, they're known also as zone, okay? So, so what you're gonna have here is Arik Amping, right? Then you're gonna have Ava Ve'ima or Avi. This is how the Kabbalists know these sections. And then you're gonna have Zon. And Zon basically is Zeramping, the Z of Zeramping, and the Nun of Nuchba. So this is called Zon. Okay? Arik Amping, Avi, Zon. But like they say, it's only 5 sephirot. It's Keter, Ava Ve'ima, Serampim, and Nukva. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay? So you got 5. That's what he's saying in here. Then he says there are 7 days of creation, and in these 7 days of creation, there are 2 parsufim. And those 2 parsufim are Serampim and Nukva. So you got the 6 sephirot within Serampim, right? And you have the Nukva, and the Nukva basically is going to be day number 7, right? And it says here that the writings of the act of the creation explain how Ava Ve'ima, how Avi, right, which is Chokmah Bina, emanated them from the beginning of their formation to the end of gadlut, which is gadlut means adulthood or greatness, and this is conducted in then over 6,000 years. So when we see the 6 days of creation, and then the 7th day, which is that's what we celebrate Shabbat, to celebrate these 6 days of creation, of working hard in order to because the 6 days of creation, for those of you who haven't studied intermediate Kabbalah or advanced Kabbalah, 6 days of creation are corrections of something that happened before the creation that we know in the book of Genesis, and that correction is the correction of the mixing of the vessels of bestowal with the vessels of with the egoistic vessels, and that's the breaking of the vessels, which is called the Shevirat HaKelim. And this word of 7 days of creations are actually what we call the word of Asilut, okay? And that's what we're basically the word of correction is the 6 days of correction. And before the 6 days of correction, you're gonna see this also in the Zohar, in which it is explained in there how basically 8 melachim, 8 kings fell basically, and these 8 melachim times 4 equals 32. 32 times 6 is 320, which is the total sum of these kelim that broke before the Shevirat, during the Shevirat HaKelim. Then you have the first 9 sephirot, which equal 288, meaning that 388 minus all the malchuts of those 3 of life, right? Were basically able to be redeemed, or are able to be redeemed, except 32. Those remaining 32s are called the stony heart and are only corrected at the end of all correction, the article. Okay, so this is something that you have to know, that what we're talking here is about the correction of the Shevirat HaKelim. And when Baal HaSulam is telling us here that these are basically are 5 sephirot, what he's telling us is that you have Keter, which is Arik Camping, and if you have something to write, make sure you write this down. Keter is Arik Camping, it's going to be called Galgalta, forehead. Then you got Chokmah, which is going to be called Enaim. Then you got Bina divided into two sections. The 3 first, or Gimel Rishonot, which is called Garde Bina, those are called Nikvei Enaim, or pupils, right? And then the 7 Ozain Tachtonot, the 7 lower, the Bina, which are the also called ears. And above the seven, from Gar all the way together, those are Galgata and Naim. It's called Galgata and Naim. And Galgata and Naim are vessels of bestowal. Then from the Zain Tachtonot, the seven lower ones of Bina, all the way to Malchut, that is called Ahab. Ahab because it's the Osen, Hoten, and Pe. So that's the first letter of this ear, nose, and mouth. But don't think that these are the forehead, eyes, pupils, ears, nose, and mouth of a person, or that God has that, or or something like that. That's not it. This is a way to describe it, since everything is a pattern. Even the human body is a pattern of the things above. So we are explaining everything according to that pattern. So we use words that are familiar to us in order to explain that. Okay, you just know that Galgata and Naim are vessels of bestowal, and Ahab are vessels of redemption. Okay, and we're going to talk about these things as we study the Zohar a little bit deeper. As you can see, it's a lot of information just of the lily. The lily here it's something beyond what probably most of us are accustomed to see when we're studying the Zohar. Okay. So when he says Rabbi Hizkiah begins with this explanation of Nukva, the seramping, explaining that the order of her emanation was basically from Ima, Bina, which is called Elohim. Okay? And this is the meaning of when the Zohar said Rabbi Hizkiah begins with the explanation of the lily, of the rose, which is called Nukba of Seramping, or in Aramaic, Nukba de Seramping. And this is at the time of Gadlut. The Nukva is called the Assembly of Israel. In the time of adulthood, it's called the Assembly of Israel. And this is why it says, what is a rose? What is a rose, right? So what is a rose? This part over here. Who is a rose, or what is a rose? And main, it actually says main Shoshanah, right? So main Shoshanah can say what or who. I would say it's more what is a rose. This refers to Knesset Israel, the collective soul roots of Israel, Malchut, right? And then he says, that there are two states of that rose, right? And he says, that for there is one level of a rose and there is another level of a rose, right? And then he says, just as a rose, which is found amidst the thorn, has within it the colors red and white, also Knesset Israel has within her both judgment and loving kindness. So let's talk about that. So there's two states in here, and these states are the states of katnut and gadlut. Katnut means smallness, and gadlut means adulthood. So katnut is a small, right? So explain the small one. It says this is the beginning of the formation of this Knesset Israel, in which there is only the sephirot keter in her, in which the light in her is only of that level called nefesh, right? And the bottom 9 sephirot are basically outside of Atzilut in the world of Bria. Okay, so what we have is that we're gonna see this, to explain that, a little bit better. When it says here the other ones are basically, outside of, or the other 9 are outside of the word absolute. That's katnut. Katnut is basically what we have here, in which you have the 9 other sephirot all the way down below what is called the chasei, the parsa. And what we're gonna see here is the following: that in actually the tabur in here, and parsas over here. When they fall below the tabur, basically these are egoistic. They become egoistic vessels. Okay, and when that happens, there's what is called judgment. When there's judgment, it's basically a constriction in which the vessels don't receive, because if it receives, it's going to be for an egoistic desire, right? So it decides, I'm not going to receive, what I'm going to do, it's receive only if I am able to give back to the Creator. So it's a state in which it's not giving light to anything below here, right? So basically, in this place of Bria, there's no light coming in there. So everything is in up here, right? Like if it's just the head that is working in this moment. Let's look at it that way, okay? Then, in the state of gadlut, when her bottom nine rise from the world of Bria into the world of Atzilut, and with them, she becomes basically a full parsuf, right? So basically what is happening is the 9 sephirot that are down here, they rise up, they go up above, the tabur here. And then it creates, a full parsuf. Now, I wish I could, explain a little bit more here because it's a lot of information. But this is also how Adam Harishon, as you can see here, was born, okay? In this state of katnut and gadlut that was going on. At that time, she rises with Seramping, her husband, to an equal level with Abi the Atzilut, and they clothe in them, okay? So, what we have is, this is the world of Atzilut, right? So what we have is Seramping and Nukva going to a higher level, a level that is at the level of Abi here, right? So they're right here at this level of Abi. And that's when you're going to see a state of gadlut, because now the light can come, all the way down. And then they rise higher, and that's when you're going to see Seramping at the same level of Abi, which is Abba Ve'ima, and Nukva, which is Malchut. They're already at that level. And that is called gadlut, in which the whole system is actually receiving light, okay? So there's 2 levels. There's the level where everything falls down, or there's no light down here. There's a level in which the whole system has a light, right? Now, the state of katnut is called a rose among the thorns. Why? Because her bottom 9 were emptied from the light of Atzilut and remain as thorn. Gadlut is called a rose, or assembly of Israel. This is why it was said there is a rose and there is a rose. So down here, no rose. That has basically, this is a rose in the thorns. This is a rose that is a rose, right? A complete rose. So let's put it out in simple terms. What you see here is actually what's happening in Shabbat. We celebrate Shabbat, and this is a mystery of Shabbat, and their ascensions of the worlds. And this is the secret behind the lily here. And if the assembly of Israel, those who call themselves Israel, are able to keep Shabbat properly, what they're performing is actually an ascension of these worlds all the time, right? In which we are rising higher and higher and higher until we have something called the evening before Shabbat, which is when Adam Harishon was created, in which is the rose with all its light. Then there's something that happened, or there was something that happened, which we read in Genesis, and is when the sin happened, and all the system that was receiving light all of a sudden falls down to something called Mador Klipot, which is the place of the Klipot. And with it, there's a soul that is here between Bria and Asiya, called Adam Harishon, and that's also, the assembly of Israel. And when that happened, the Shoshanah falls with it, the assembly of Israel, the Congregation of Israel. The Shoshanah, the light that is with it, also falls down below the tabur to the place of the klipot. Okay? And that's basically what's happening here. Okay? The rose with thorns, the rose in the place of the klipot, and the rose that is just a rose, right? A rose full of light. A rose in katnut, a rose in gadlut, right here. Okay. The red color indicates that there is a gripping of the outer ones there, for the klipot, are sucking light from it. And this is katnut. When her bottom 9 are in bria, there is also white in her kli, the keter, where there is no gripping to outer ones, as it says, just as a rose among the thorns. It has red and white. The assembly of Israel contains din and rachamim, meaning judgment and mercy. This indicates that even in her gadlut, when she's called the assembly of Israel, although at that time she rises and close with Bina, din still remain in her because she needs the masach that is set up in her for the sivut de akah, which is striking, right? We strike the upper light and reflects it back because of the din of the masach. Why she needs a masach, right? She's the masach is basically an intention. It's a restriction that was done, and that restriction was done in order to help the vessel to receive in order to give to the Creator. So what we have is a vessel that will basically, let's say, since I have the cup here of tea, you have the vessel will receive, but it has a cap in the top. And in that cap there's a little hole, and that hole will let the light go in only if it is for the proper use. If not, the light is going to be reflected, and the light that is reflected is basically what is called giving back to the Creator. You or using the light in order to satisfy the Creator. I receive 100. Actually, the Creator gives me 100. I receive 10%, and I reflect 90%, because when I'm receiving, I'm internalizing as or pinimi. What I'm reflecting is creating vessels of pistol, but then that light is going to become surrounding light. It's going to surround that vessel, and that's the potential that each human soul has to become like the Creator. And that light puts pressure on the vessel, and the internal light also puts pressure on the vessel, and that's how the light start changing. The vessel start changing because of those two lights, and then eventually the vessel makes calculations in order to receive more lights and more lights and more lights and correct itself. And that's basically what is going on, right, in that vessel. And that's why you're going to have din and rachamim, meaning that now you have a correction that is done not in a way of a straight line, but of a way of 3 lines. And we're going to see that as we study the Zohar, okay? And that is known today as this, as a tree of life, right? The diagram of the tree of life. Then he says that by that sivut and that calculation that he does, by reflecting the light back to the Creator, because of that restriction in that cap of the top of that vessel, he raises 10 sephirot in that light of reflected light of Or Hoser, which is called the light of judgment, of Din, within them. And it draws 10 sephirot of Or Yashar, direct light, called light of Rachamim, which is light of mercy. Hence, there are Din and Rachamim in the assembly of Israel as well, corresponding to the red and the white that the rose among the thorns has. Let me see if I can find a... Okay, so right here. This is basically what is called the 5 parsufim, which later we're gonna know them as the five leaves that are part of the lily. And the first one, as we mentioned before, what we were talking here, basically this is here, Keter Chokma, Bina, Serampia, Malchut. You're going to know them as Galgalta, Ab, Sag, Ma, Bon. And these are names given by the numerical value of the names of God that they're spelled down here. But what we're talking is about the light, right? When we talk about the red color, that light is basically this reflected light, right? And it's called Or Joser. Or Joser, which is a reflected light. The light that comes down is the light of mercy, or Yashar. And there's a light that surrounds the Parsuf, because this reflected light, surrounds the Parsuf, put pressure in it, and eventually makes some kind of calculation, what is called, raising the Masach, in order to create other Parsufim and other Parsufim, and in that way, start correcting itself. So these are the lights, basically what he's talking about, or the colors are talking about. So when we see the red light is basically the Or Joser, or reflected light, and the white light is the direct light, right? At this moment, it's not mentioning Or Pinimi or Joser, which is the surrounding light. Or Pinimi is the internal light, okay? So that's exactly what it's saying here. For those of you who want to know what we were talking here when it comes to the colors, right? So it says, that Or Joser basically, raises 10 sephirot. So there's this light that comes down, and the light that goes up creates 10 sephirots in here. Basically, those 10 sephirots are, even though it's a light that is a light of restriction, it's a light of restriction because the vessel restricting itself in order to be able to give back to the Creator and not feel ashamed of receiving all this light in an egoistic way. And then it says in here, right? Just as a rose, she sent me the thorn. Can I say sorry? Just as a rose has in it 13 petals, so too Knesset Israel has within her 13 paths of mercy, which surround her from all her sides. So what are we talking here? So the Sulam commentary says the following. This is the vessel that Solomon made, which stands on 12 oxen. This is so because her bottom 9 that fell into Bria have been established there in 12 oxen. And the point of Keter that remain in Asilu is the sea that stand up, sea or vessel that stand on top of them. Altogether they are called 13 petals of the rose. So he explained the mochin de gadlut de nukva. Mochin is a brain, right? Which is aveima. The gadlut means the adultness of nukva, which is Malchut, that contains illumination of Chokmah, extend from the 13 names called the 13 qualities of Rachamim. This is why it is said that the Assembly of Israel consists of 13 qualities of mercy, Rachamim, as well. The main thing that Rabbi Chizkiah comes to tell us here is that this comparison between the rose among the thorns and the Assembly of Israel is that everything that the Nukva, which is Malchut, has in her state of gadlut, the state of greatness, must be exactly as a preparation and qualification in the beginning of her formation, in a state of katnut. This is why it was said that opposite, the white and red in katnut, din and rachamim comes out of her gadlut. In opposite, the 13 petals of katnut, which is the smallness, there's also 13 qualities of mercy, of rachamim, that appears in her gadlut. Okay, So we're gonna have 13 qualities uh, of basically of judgment, and then these vessels down here don't receive that light, so that's the katnut, smallness, and those are vessels of restrictions, right? Or the light being reflected, and then when the light is received down here, and the only way to receive light down here is if it's elevated to this state of gadlut, greatness, then here is light of rachamim, or light uh, of um, of mercy. Okay, so you're gonna have 13 lights of judgment, 13 lights of rachamim, sweetening, the judgment, as we're gonna see later on that. Then we continue reading the Zohar. It says that after this, the name Elohim is written again in the text. And why it is mentioned again? In order to bring out the 5 rigid leaves that surround a rose. And these 5 represent the 5 gates of salvation. And this secret is written about in the verse, I will raise the cup of salvation. This is the cup of benediction which is raised after a meal. The cup of benediction must rest on 5 fingers and no more, just as a rose rests on 5 rigid leaves. And this rose is the cup of benediction. From the second to the third mention of the name Elohim in the Torah, there are 5 words. From this point, the or light was created, hence, let there be light, and concealed and enclosed within that covenant, Yesod, that entered the rose and fructified. This is referred to as a fruit tree bearing fruit after its kind, wherein is the seed thereof. This seed is the covenant, and just as the covenant is sown by 42 birthings from that same seed, so is the engrave of the holy name sown by the 42 letters that describe the work of creation. Now let's go a little bit deeper. What are we talking about here, right? So when he says in here, when we talk here, let's go quickly here. When he talk about the name Elohim, so the name Elohim, it's basically the force or the aspect of the creator that is used in order to create. So it says in the beginning, Elohim created, is of the aspect of Bina that emanates in the Nukva of Serampin. Okay? So we got our Behima, Nukva, right? And Serampin. So it comes from this aspect of Ima, the Nukva of Serampin. And then it says, he elicited 13 words. The heaven and the earth was empty and chaotic, and the darkness over the face of the abyss, and all that, right? So, when God began to create, also says, in the beginning God created, what we're going to see is this. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. You're going to find one Elohim, right? Then after that name Elohim, you're going to find 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 words, right? Then 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 before the next Elohim. So between these two names Elohim, in this verse of the first verse of verses of Bible, you're gonna see 13 words, and these are basically implying these 13 attributes of that we're talking here. These 13 words imply that there are 13 petals of the rose among the thorns. Among the thorns is the rose, or these vessels that are part of Knesset Israel that are basically in the side of the cliffs. The vessel, the seed that stands above the 12 oxen, right? which we talk about, what that means, which are a preparation and qualification for the assembly of Israel to receive the 13 qualities of Rahamim. So these are restrictions, basically, right? Et hashamayim ve'et haaretz ve'haaretz hayta tohu v'vohu ve'choshech el penei tahon ve'ruach, and then the word Elohim, right? So these are basically, that there's something that is not letting anything enter. That's why everything was tohu v'vohu. Everything, even though the heaven and the earth were created and everything was void, not formed. There was darkness, and there was nothing, no lights in those vessels yet that are below, because everything is, what we said before, in a state of vessels of bestowal only. So these vessels down here, the hap is not receiving anything. Okay? The vessels of bestowals are the only ones that are used here. So Sag Devina and Zon, which is around Pia Malchut, has no light yet. Everything is in a state of katnut. Basically, all this is just from this line, which is the parsa, right? Up, which is Gagar Tainai. Okay? Now, what we're gonna see is the following now. He's gonna explain now, how these things are going to unfold into the whole creation that we have explained in the Zohar. It says it is written to surround the assembly of Israel and to keep her, right? These 13 petals. This is because the 13 qualities of Rahamim, which are the qualities of mercy, the complete mochin, the nukva, or brain, the nukva, are regarded as surrounding and illuminating her on all sides, from all around, through them. She is kept from contact with the outer ones, meaning the forces of egoism, the klipots, keep her from contact with the outer ones, because as long as the great mohin, or brain, in illumination of Chokmah from the 13 qualities are not in her, there is suction from the outer ones in her. So, like we mentioned before, this is what is kept basically from, or protected, in order to protect her basically from the light that she might be losing by these klifot that are kind of like vampires, right? Sucking the light out of the nukva. So he says also, so we're gonna see that after these word Elohim, so we have the first Elohim. You're gonna have what we said, 13 words, right before that one. Now, 13 words, after that Elohim, until the next Elohim. Then we're gonna see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words before the next Elohim. And those 5 words are what is called in here the 5 rigid leaves. So he says, and these 5 represent the 5 gates of salvation. Okay? 5 gates of salvation. This secret is written about in the verse, I will raise the cup of salvation. This is the cup of benediction, which is raised after a meal. So when you do the blessing after a meal, this is the cup that we actually raise in order to do the blessing. The cup of benediction must rest on 5 fingers, and no more, just as the rose rests in 5 rigid leaves. Then it explains, that this rose is the cup of benediction from the second to the third mention of the name Elohim. There are 5 words from this point. The or light was created hence. So we see, let's go back here. So once we see these 5 words after this name of Elohim right here, 1, 2, 3, five, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's another Elohim. And then what we're going to see is right here says Yehi Or. Yehi Or. Let there be light, and there was light. Okay? So basically is what he's saying here. After that, let there be light, and it says and conceal and enclose within that covenant that enters the rose and fructify it. So this is when the light start entering then all these vessels called the ahab, and becomes a full parsuf. Parsuf basically an elevation of the world into where all this light of the Creator enter each and every single vessel. And then he mentions, let me go to, then he mentions, that the seed of the covenant refers to Yesod, okay? So what we need to understand when he mentions covenant is going to refer to Yesod, so all this light that comes from our encamping to Abba Ve'ima, basically Nukva and Seramping, let's say zone went to this level, and nothing below, let's say below, let's see if I can make a line here, nothing below this here, receive any light, okay, because sun rose from down here all the way to Abba Ve'ima. So it's using just these vessels here. These vessels are called gadlut and iron vessels of Istol. But then, when the light goes all the way down, that means that then there's no restriction, right? The restriction is not there, and there's light of Rahamim. And we need to understand something. The light of Chokmah, cannot go down to these vessels down here if it's not enclosed in the light of Bina. So it needs to go to Bina in order to be imparted to Seramping and Nukva. And that's why the light of Chokmah needs to be enclosed in the light of mercy, meaning the light of mercy is going to become like a pipe through which that light is going to go to the lower Parsufim, like Seramping and Nukva. What happened is that from Abba Ve'ima, Seramping is going to receive that light and needs to impart that light to Nukva, and it's through the covenant, through Yesod. And that's what we're going to see here, that this seed is the covenant, Yesod. And just as the covenant is sown by 42 birthings from that same seed, so is the engraved and holy name sown by 42 letters that describe the work of creation. So what you're going to see then is that we're going to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 from the Elohim to the other one, and this is called the Brit. The light is enclosed in here, is hidden, right? So we got 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, 17, 18, 19, 18, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, and so on and so forth until you see, that when you look at this, they're gonna be, let's read the Sulam so we can understand it properly. These are basically 42 letters, and these 42 letters are simple Yod, He, and Vav, He, with fillings. And with fillings, which are 42 letters, that seed is the token of the covenant, which are 5 Hasidim and 5 gebudot that extend from the name 42. Okay. And this is basically, what the Baal has explained here is basically that, exactly like I was saying, that what's happening is that when it says Yehi or, all those 42 letters are going to be basically creating 42 strikings or 42 matings or 42 birthing. And basically it's Yesod or Seramping in this case, giving its seed to Nukva, through which sephirot through Yesod, okay? And this is what is said. The engraved and explicit name, Nukva, is called a name or engraved, means her katnut, explicit in her gadlut. And they too were sewn and built in 42 letters, like the 42 sivugim or striking in the sivug, in the token of the covenant. Also, the 42 letters of the act of creation are the 42 letters presented from Bereshit through the pet of Bohu. Tohu Bohu means unformed chaotic. And then Baal HaSulam start explaining, more in depth, that if we go through all this, it's gonna take us more than an hour to explain, right? And but there's a lot more, in here, because when something that the Baal HaSulam explained is when we talk about the 5 rigid leaves that surround the lily, it also talks about the cup of benediction that is raised after the blessing after meals, right? And this cup of benediction will rest in 5 fingers and no more. And why this cup needs to be raised? This cup is basically like a prayer, like a request. You gotta make that request. So it's giving us here the basics, and I'm gonna finish with this to understand what the lily is all about. The lily is basically Nukva. There is the Knesset Israel, the Shekhinah, or collective soul is there. In order for Nukva to receive the light, it goes through a process. That process, as we mentioned before, is a process of judgment, which is a process in which Nukva, let me see if I can copy and paste this, and I'm not going back and forth. Let's put it this way, like that. So it's using basically Zon and Nukva are at this level, the level of Ava and Ima, and that is called katnut, which is smallness. What the lily, this part of the lily is explaining to us is that through all these mention of the basically, like we have here, the 42 matings, which is the 42 letters of creation. Then we have, the 5 words that are between the 5. Basically, we have is the 5 rigid. I think I have the wrong one here. Yeah, the 5 rigid leaves. These from this point of or the light was created. From these 5 rigid leaves and everything. The 5 fingers. All these secret about the raising the cup of salvation. All these things about the mention of these words before one name Elohim to the other, and how we count basically 13 words, and how in here we count 5 words, and how all these letters are 42 letters, and all that, and why, where it says, from Ha'or, is basically Yesod, the breed, and that kind of stuff. All these secrets and everything are explained in this following way, okay? What you need to understand is this, in a simple way. Because we can go on and philosophize about it and explain it 100 times, but the small, or the nutshell of all this is this. Ari camping is Keter, like we mentioned. Abba and Ima is Chokmah and Bina. They're known as Abi. Zon is Serampin and Nuba. When he says, that there's a rose and there's a rose that is in or has or is in the within the thorns. That's a rose that is basically in a state of no light, which basically if it comes down, this clay pot can suck all the light of it, they feed from it. So it's a rose that is basically surrounded by the clay pot, and these clay pots are basically keeping themselves alive because of the light that is in there. But in order to correct this, it makes a correction, and that correction is done by going higher. And what it does is it only uses these vessels that are above here, and those vessels are the vessels of bestowal. So there's no light going to the ahab, to the vessels of reception. There's only vessels of bestowal. So it's using this level as for now. So Serampin and Nuba are at the level of Abi. But that's not what creation is all about. Creation is about having this surrounding light becoming, or pinimi, becoming internal light and filling the whole parts of the whole system. So the vessel or the creature in this case, or the system, makes calculations and say, you know what? Let's do something. Let's use that light and let's clothe it in, or basically in light of mercy, rahamim, and in that way we can give to these vessels below, right? This is when then what is happening is there's a request from down here. That's the raising of the cup of salvation, right? Raising the cup of salvation means there's a request, a prayer. Raising man, basically the Mayin Nukping, right? The Mayin Nukping out the feminine waters. And when that happens, Abba and Ima make a coupling, a union, right? They face each other, and in this way the light goes down to Serampin. Serampin then has to do what is called calculations in here, and through Yesod, which is the secret of the covenant, which is the 42 strikings that are mentioned here, will give it then to Nuva. Nuva will not receive anything from Serampin unless Serampin receive it from Ima, and Ima cannot impart to Serampin if she doesn't have the light of Chokmah surrounded by the light of Rahamim. Because the light of Chokmah is a light that is very strong, and if it goes without being restricted by Ima, it will basically destroy this whole system, right? So it needs to be restricted. It needs to be going little by little, and different calculation needs to be made in order for Nuba to receive it in a way that will illuminate the whole system, and it will be in a way that will be done in order to reveal the Creator to His creatures. Okay, so that's basically what is happening here. So later we're gonna continue with the lily, and then there's a little part of the lily that we need to continue talking about, which is, it says, as the covenant is sown by 42 matings from the same seed, so the engraved of the holy name is sown by 42 letters that are describing the work of creation. We're gonna delve deeper into that, so you can see what is the secret between the Yohem, the Valhe, filled with 10 letters, and in that way you understand why it is 42 striking and how is that done, and also what 42 actually means. 42 is basically Or Hasidim and something called Yeshut, which in here we're gonna know as Elohim. Okay, uh, and then after that we're gonna start talking about the flower buds, and the flower buds are basically the sephirot. So we're gonna start now understanding that this flower is basically not only a the Congregation of Israel as we know it, but it's a system and how the system is gonna work. So like I said before, keep in mind that you don't need to understand all this. You can read it and reread it, and there's so much information here that you might not understand it right away. But understand that when we talk about Rabbi Hezkiah, the secret is that Rabbi Hezkiah is basically representing the light that comes from Ein Sof through something called Arik camping, and Arik and Ping received a light from a system called Atik, a parsuf in the top that is called Atik. And we don't know anything about Atik actually. We know about Arik camping because of how Abba Ve'ima, work with Serampin and Nukva, right? So we're gonna see, there's some mentions about Atik and all that, but it's based on by his actions. I know him, right? So we're gonna see all that. So we're gonna know more about this in the next shiur, in lesson 2, as we talk more about the lily, and then we enter into the sephirot. Basically, we're talking about the parsuf. Now we're gonna talk about the system inside that those parsuf or those parsufim. Okay. So with this, we're gonna be finishing. But before we finish, I'm gonna read a little bit from Tikkun 38. Tikkun 38 from the Tikkunei Zohar. It's Bereshit. In the beginning, God created. The light of the Torah is the Yohe and the Vavhe name, the Havaya, and it is described as a lily. It has 5 inner leaves and 5 outer leaves. All right, so 5 internal sephirot or parsufim and 5 external parsufim. They represent the 2 letters He in the Yod He Vav He name. The stem of the Vav is the Yod, and the stem of the Vav and the Yod is like an apple at the top. The Zohar described it as a king's wand. When we are in exile, meaning farther from the light, the lily is closed. In the final redemption, the Gamar Hatikun, the lily will open the 5 lights. The word for light or appear 5 times in the story of creation. At this time, the lily is decorated with the light of the Torah and dressed with the 4 letters of the Yohed and the Vavhe. That is represented by the 4 white garments of the high priest. All the 4 garments are also of the high priest, and they represent the 4 letters of Adonai. The 2 names is the aspect of the complete unification of the light and the vessel that will happen in the final redemption. So I leave you with that. In the next shiurim, we're gonna delve a little bit on other verses of the Zohar, in which we're gonna know more about this Congregation of Israel, okay, and what it is all about. So as we continue and finish our study in this first verse called the lily. So I hope you have enjoyed. Let me know any feedback or anything like that on how to make this better. Or like I said, don't expect me to explain this so you can understand. It's not about understanding. It's about connecting to the light, okay? Connect to the light. That's the whole purpose of these lessons in the Zohar. You need to connect to the splendor of the Zohar, the splendor of the book of Zohar. And in that way you connect with the Creator and also to other souls of humanity. So until then, we'll be A pleasure to see you once again in the next shiur.